1892. And it was a very busy time, a very busy place. And it was kind of different factors that crossed over. What was going on in this country and what was going on in the rest of the world. What brought so many people here. So I'm going to try to fill in those gaps. So, am I being recorded for all posterity? All right. So, let's see. Over here in the United States and in New York, it was a time of extreme expansion. We were building everything. We were building subways, bridges, railroads, skyscrapers. It was a time when people were moving out of their mansions into luxury apartment buildings, like the Dakota House. You heard of the Dakota House? That's where John and Yoko lived. First luxury apartment building ever, 1884. So getting people, the rich, to move out of their mansions was a hard sell, but we had to. We didn't have enough space for everybody. And things were changing. And we just needed people to grow, to work. To work is the key, to work. So the doors to immigration are wide open. It's a very rare moment in our history where we welcome everybody. Everybody's welcome. You didn't need a passport. You didn't need a visa. All you needed was about $35 in your pocket and a willingness to take a chance, because you might have been rejected. You didn't know until you got here what your fate was going to be. And now we're going to talk about what was going on elsewhere. So in that time frame, 1890s and onward till about early 1920s, we had big numbers of people coming from particular regions. In total, people came from everywhere, but the huge numbers were coming from Southern Europe, especially Italy. We're coming from Eastern Europe, especially Russia, Poland, Lithuania. And what was going on in those countries were government regimes which were very oppressive and very repressive, making it difficult for people to work. They couldn't even make a living, making it difficult for them to worship the way they wanted to and to express their political beliefs. All these factors were driving people out of home, away from their homes. People don't leave home unless it's bad. They don't want to leave their home. They don't. They had to. So they would make their way in Europe to the ports. In Italy, all over, wherever there was a port, there were boats. And they would board these steamships. And they would come the cheapest way they could, which was known as steerage class. That's the bottom of the boat. And there, they were packed in there like sardines, because the more people packed in is the more money the shipping companies made, and they wanted to make a profit, like always. And the conditions were terrible. No sanitation at all, really. And that was because there was no water. Water was rationed. On this voyage, which was roughly 3 weeks, you can expect not to ever bathe, ever, in 3 weeks. Can you imagine what it was like in the second week? So, some companies only gave them 2 cups of water a day. So it was rough going. And if you were healthy, by the time you got off the ship, there's a good chance you got sick. And often you would come down with serious contagious diseases, which was what the inspectors here were very concerned about. So they would come into our harbors, and then they would board steamships and come here. Not steamships, ferries, I should say. Now, if you were coming first or second class on the same boat, you didn't come to Ellis Island. You got stamped right on the boat, welcome to the USA. Only the bottom of the boat came here. So these people, for the most part, did not speak English. They were illiterate. They didn't read or write. And just because they were uneducated didn't mean that they were, simpletons. They weren't at all. They just didn't have an opportunity for education. And that's what the hope was, to better themselves by coming here. So they were watched the minute they stepped off the boat, and they were scrutinized and inspected and studied. And they were looking for their physicality. Were they healthy? Could they work? That was the criteria. It was not about money. It wasn't about money at all. paperwork, checked their ship manifest with all the questions, made sure it all matched up. And to do that, they would go up into a big room, an empty space today. It's called the registry room, and that's the highlight, I think, of this place, visiting here. And there their paperwork would be reviewed, but they had to go up a very steep steps to get up there. And they watched them go up. Could they walk those steps easily? Were they limping? Were they wheezing? Were they coughing? Anything. Anything that drew their attention, they'd get a chalk mark. That meant they were going to be pulled aside for further inspection, and their time here would be detained slower. It wasn't guaranteed they'd get right through once you got the chalk mark. They tried to outwit the inspector. Sometimes they take off their coat with the chalk mark and put it on inside out. But for the most part, that was what would happen to them. So there were all kinds of, scams people had to come up with. So one thing they were looking for were contagious diseases, like tuberculosis, like diphtheria. And another one that they got on the boat was an eye disease called trachoma, which today is curable. But then it led to blindness and death. And if you had this, there was no way you were going to be admitted. That was guaranteed. So there were these inspectors who came around with a hook, and they would yank up the eyelid, poke around in there. It was very uncomfortable, very painful, and very humiliating, really, in the end. And they were terrified of this guy. They were known as the button hook men because the tools looked like the old hooks they used to button up their boots. So, now if they were sick, from a mild sickness to a contagious sickness, they would be sent to the hospital. Ellis Island has a very good hospital system, and I don't know if you noticed in the back there, the lower, smaller buildings is the quarantine area. So if you had a contagious disease like tuberculosis, you were put in quarantine, and if they felt that they could treat you and heal you, you could stay there for months until you were better, and then you were admitted. 350 babies were born in Ellis Island. It was a very good hospital for those days. So, that was a very fearful thing for them, being separated. Maybe the mother would be sent to the hospital, the kid wasn't, sent anywhere, and nobody knew what was going on. Another thing that would happen to them is the minute they walked in the door, they were asked to leave their baggage because they didn't speak English. They didn't know, am I going to get my baggage back? Why are they taking my baggage? Are they confiscating my baggage? So there were so many unknowns for them because of language difficulties. Of course, we had interpreters who spoke every language. But often when you had the question, the person wasn't there to explain the answer. So a lot of things went unanswered and remained a mystery. So they would go up to the registry room and have their paperwork reviewed. And today it's a big empty hall, huge hall. And you have to imagine what it was like back then with all these lanes of people, hundreds of them, all fearful. What's going to happen to me? What questions are they going to ask me? Am I going to say the right answer? If they were lucky, it was between 3 and 7 hours they would get through. If they got the chalk mark, it meant they were pulled aside for further inspection. Only 20% of all people were pulled aside for further inspection. Not a big percentage. And of that 20%, only 2% were actually rejected. It's also a very low percentage. I think it's an indication how much we wanted immigrants, how much we needed them. And we were not making it hard. There weren't trick questions and all that kind of thing. It was, we want you, we need you, we welcome you. So, if they were lucky, they would get through here, and within a few hours they would be issued a hot meal, which delighted them. They hadn't been given anything ever for free. And then they were able to exchange their money and buy US dollars. And here they had an office where there was a train station here. You could buy tickets to go on. Maybe you were going to Boston or Chicago or some other place to move along. So it was pretty common in those days for the head of the household to come first work a bit, and then send back for the rest of the family, because the boat fare was $100 a person roughly. And if you're a family of 4 or 5, that's $400 or $500 in 1892. A lot of money for people at the bottom of society. So that was the case of the very first person who walked through the door the day this building opened on January 1st of 1892, Annie Moore. Annie Moore was a Irish teenager traveling with her little brother, and her parents were here waiting for her, which was a common scenario actually back then. And she's part of the Ellis Island legend, and there is a statue of her inside upstairs. So there were immigrant aid societies here to meet them and facilitate if that was needed. Might have been a Hebrew Aid Society or the Italian American Aid Society, help them get settled, find work if necessary. Many went right into New York City to the Lower East Side, which is a notorious immigrant community, and all different pockets of different ethnicities. And if this period interests you, there's a wonderful museum there called the Tenement Museum that recreates their experience on Orchard Street. So, 12 million immigrants pass through here, and 1 in 4 Americans have a connection to Ellis Island, whether it's immediate or distant. And I don't know if you could see, just beyond the seating area there is a metal willow. That has a list alphabetically of many of the people who came through here. And I'll tell you how that happened. So Ellis Island was a busy, busy place until kind of the 1920s. And then once we got airplanes, we didn't really need Ellis Island. It becomes obsolete because we start to fly, as it was all about boats. And then in the 1940s, Ellis Island becomes a detention center for undesirables like Japanese and Germans. 1954, Ellis Island closes. And it's abandoned. It's fallen apart. It is dilapidated and nobody's doing anything with it. And finally, the Park Service steps in and says, hey, this is our history. We really have to do something about it. So they begin a project to turn it into a museum. And that's what that wall is about. They were fundraising to get people to, donate and help rebuild Ellis Island as a museum. And it opened in 1990. However, when it opened and they were getting it all together, they did nothing with the hospital. The hospital has been deserted and dilapidated and abandoned and fallen apart for years and years and years. It was like a haunted house over there. Really, it was. And there's, people have done photographic studies, and it's like creepy and it's like scary to look at the place. They finally decided to, update that. And they have, you can see, if you look at the rooftops, they're brand new. It's brand new. So they are finally going to do something like that. And I think shortly, maybe in the next year, it'll open to the public. So Ellis Island is all about their stories, their dreams, their aspirations, what happens to them. And it's a treasure chest of those stories. There's a story of an Italian immigrant. He goes, starts working in New York City as a waiter at the Plaza Hotel. And he has the brilliant idea to put ravioli in a can. His name was Torti Boiardi. It translates to Chef Boyardee, a household name in the United States. You heard of Chef Boyardee. And another one is Tom Carvel, a Greek immigrant. He bought himself a pickup truck, started selling ice cream, driving around out of his truck. On a hot summer day, he gets a flat tire. His ice cream starts to melt, and he goes, oh my God, I better sell my ice cream soft and cheap and get rid of it before I lose everything. And his customers love it. And he creates an empire of soft serve ice cream. Carvel is a household name in the U.S. Every supermarket carries Carvel. Many of us have had Carvel ice cream cakes at our birthdays. So, there's so many of these terrific stories. And there's a long, long list of people who came through here the first round. people like Bob Hope, Walt Disney, Irving Berlin, considered the greatest American songwriter, Bela Lugosi, the first Dracula, Johnny Weissmuller, the first Tarzan, started out as an Olympic swimmer, gold medalist, Rudolph Valentino, the actor, Max Factor created an empire of cosmetics. Hollywood names are probably most familiar, people like Cary Grant, Claudette Colbert, Al Jolson, Edward G. Robinson. He played gangsters in the old movies. And then we had real gangsters. Lucky Luciano, who's considered the father of the Italian mob in the United States, and his Jewish gangster buddy, Mayor Lansky, all buddies on the Lower East Side of New York. So it's just an extensive and broad range of all the people who came through here. Ruth Bader Ginsburg, her family, Tony Bennett. I mean, it just is on and on and on. And then it's the next generation too. They, the parents came for them, and they were very, they had incredible achievements as well. People like Martin Scorsese, the film director, Martha Stewart, Bruce Springsteen, Jerry Seinfeld, Yogi Berra, the baseball player. It's just an extraordinary collection, and we owe so much to these immigrants. And I think it's their very presence that makes New York such an attractive place to visit. Maybe you want to try a pastrami sandwich at Katz's Deli, or have a bagel or a New York pizza. All of this is because of them, and we owe them so much, and they've made their contributions, and it's the American story, the classic story. So, anybody have any questions about Ellis Island before I set you free and bring it inside and show you around? Questions?